Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. Burnout is causing so many talented people, especially women, to give up their careers and feel like balance is just an unachievable buzzword. The good news is we can find joy in the chaos again. So how do we break free from the burnout? Well, Burnout Coach Amy Mangueira is here. She helps people all over the world live burnout free by bringing clarity, direction, and positive habits to their lives. She's also the author of The Path to Break Free from Burnout. Amy, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I think we all know what this feels like, but characterize what's happening in the world right now. What are you hearing about people and burnout, especially working women?
Yeah, so overload burnout is definitely on the rise. That's the type of burnout we're seeing. And this is an imbalance in the way that we're working and operating to truly achieve success. It's giving our worth over to our job or over to some other entity where we are now not protecting our time and our energy. And frankly, we're not putting ourselves first at all. We are riding in the passenger seat of the car and we're letting something else dictate our pace. And so it's extremely it's deteriorating the emotional, physical, and mental well-being of so many folks.
And we're actually going to, in this episode, we're going to define burnout. There actually are 5 stages. Maybe people have heard about the 5 stages of grief. There's the 5 stages of burnout. You write about it in your book. But first, tell us about your own burnout story. I hear it actually led to you losing hearing in one of your ears.
Yeah, burnout is a really tricky one, because like I said before, it's sort of that it's coming with the success we're chasing, right? And we're all told to go after those goals. And so finding that balance is so crucial. And for me, I was building an email marketing agency that frankly was taking off. I had one of those businesses during COVID that thrived in a terrible time for so many other businesses. And so while I was building this business at a rapid pace, I started to let the clients completely dictate the pace of my life. So soon enough, I was working 85-hour weeks. I was always on to the point of, taking messages in the middle of the night just to make sure I could get a hold of clients. It was wild the way that my time and energy was not protected. I was also then trying to fill every ounce of my white space, my personal time, with things because I was trying to have my personal time and run this business. And so what burnout's really tricky is that from the outside, people gave me all of this praise. They were like, Amy, you're so successful. You're superwoman. I was wearing all these badges of honor, like I'm a superhero. Meanwhile, I'm running myself into the ground. And so I had a lot of signs, a lot of inflammation, a lot of autoimmune types of things like rashes popping up and headaches and tension. And yes, it was last year where my hearing I got sudden hearing loss. And when we looked at the blood results, there was a ton of inflammation present. And so that was my rock bottom to slow down for sure.
It reminds me of the story I'll share with you. You're not alone. That there was a famous book that a lot of our listeners can read, as well as yours, which is The Path to Break Free from Burnout. But Arianna Huffington wrote Thrive, and she talked about how everyone thought she was so successful, and one day she woke up after falling and collapsing and passing out, and her head's bleeding, and she's like, if this is success, I don't want it. And she went back to the basics of what her Greek mother had taught her about, living with intention and what do you want. So what's the first step? How did you, that's part of the problem, right? We're in the social media world and you were getting all this praise because you looked like you had it all, but you were dying inside and you were losing yourself and your health.
Yeah. I think the sad thing in hindsight that especially now coaching, here's what I see the most. We are moving at such a rapid pace that we don't even take the time anymore to stop and reflect. Like at the end of our day, do we stop and say what went well? What didn't go well? What things do I need to improve? We're just moving too fast. So when I hit rock bottom, I literally had to stop and be like, who am I even anymore, right? There's self-discovery work that comes from this. You are very lost in burnout. You have to go back to understanding what your core values are and is this even the right path? Like, did you actually veer off the path of like who you really want to be? What would your future self want from you? And I think it's similar to the Ariana Huffington story. Sometimes we realize that like maybe this path, like this email marketing agency wasn't even giving me the fulfillment that I really craved. And so we have to make some tough decisions. One of the parts of breaking free from burnout, right, is removing that unmanaged stress out of your life. And for me, it looked like selling this agency. It looked like a new path forward. And granted, I couldn't, figure that out quickly. It took time, but we really have to stop and just say, what's going on, and self-reflect on the stress.
Yeah. So that's part of it, just awareness. And I know we have so many people out here will say, well, I'm a mom and I'm managing my kids and I'm managing my work and there's just no time for me and I'll sleep later, I'll take care of myself later. That's the problem, right? Because life is happening now. So you've helped define burnout in 5 stages that will really give us more clarity, and hopefully we can dial this back. It's not an overnight situation, but even being aware and starting to manage our stress can pay huge dividends. So let's start with the 5 stages of burnout. What's stage 1?
Stage 1 is that honeymoon stage. It's that let's go, I'm diving. This is a high energy phase. It's I want to prove my worth. I want to give it my all. And so we might be energized by saying, hey, family, I'm missing my dinner tonight because I have a 6 p.m. meeting. Like, this is an exciting stage. One caution I'll say here is that if you are starting a new job or you are in like the first 90 days of a new job and you are feeling this way, this is the time to put the boundaries in place. This is the time to protect your time and energy because you will slowly start moving down the stages. And so stage 2 is where the onset of stress becomes really present, right? So we're starting to see stress coming in and out of our lives a lot more. And this is usually by the way that we're operating. So we might be overcommitting. We might not have those boundaries. This is the stage that most folks in society say, you know what, I'm burned out and I need a vacation. The thing is that the vacation might work if you can see what change might be necessary. Do you come back from the vacation and put some boundaries in place? Do you stop overcommitting? Because if you don't, then we move into stage 3, which is the chronic stress stage. And this is the true epidemic we're seeing. It's this unmanaged stress, this fight or flight response kind of all day long. And it's literally happening in all the facets of our life. We're stressed all the time. We're anxious. And we might have this mindset of like, well, once I get to this goal, all this is going to go away. So I'm going to keep like, pushing on. The thing is that doesn't really work out. We move to stage 4, which is actually the onset of burnout. And that's where we no longer will start. We stop functioning the way that we would. So this is where we might start having family interventions where people are like, gosh, Amy, you are so busy. It's okay to put your phone down. Or why are you canceling on me again because you're working again till 10? So this is where we're really starting to see, and we're also starting to see the signs, the exhaustion, the isolation, the escape fantasies where an executive woman might be like, you know what? I think a Walmart greeter might be a really good solution, right? They want to escape desperately. We're seeing irritability here, and we're also seeing the health issues and the frequent illnesses. So a lot of times when I'm coaching leaders, I'm always like, pay attention to your direct reports. If you're starting to notice a high achiever that is now having sick time a lot, it's usually going to happen in stage 4. And then stage 5 is the chronic burnout. We call it burnout syndrome because now burnout is our operating model. And this is now literally a part of like this is how we're functioning. We're probably depressed in our personal life. We're emotionally distraught. We can't function at work anymore. And so we're starting to truly isolate, and you really need help in stage 5. This is where the serious health is going to come into play.
Well, there's been the epidemic after the pandemic of quiet quitting, where people are not just leaving, but they're showing up and they're just there, but they're barely doing anything. Is that the risk? That's certainly a risk for employers, but I mean, it's also, I think all of us want to be doing our best. And if you feel like you just can't because there's nothing left, is that part of the phenomenon, the quiet quitting, the showing up, but not really being there's no passion left, you're just burned out?
It's so great you bring that up because we tend to hear overload burnout a lot, but neglect burnout is also another stage type of burnout. And this is that quiet quitting. This is where an employee may feel stuck or helpless or inadequate. And so they're just starting to feel like there's just nothing left for them. They might not know how to get out of this job. So they're just kind of like doing the bare minimum to get by.
Excuse me. So, when I speak to women, I often will go and we'll talk about plugging our energy drains. And I say this because you teach what you have to learn. I'm a busy person. I also get excited when there's breaking news and we have a huge story and we're on that high of working. But I think I've gotten better at being like, all right, the crash is over. What do I need to take care of myself? What are the kind of questions we need to start asking to reverse the burnout?
So the very first one is probably to actually look very closely at any types of triggers that are happening over the week, let's say, that are causing that fight or flight. Stress is good in small doses, that like desire to get after it, but it should go away. So if you can kind of do an audit, I'm a big fan of audits. If you can do an audit that says, what am I coming home every night and complaining to my partner about? Those little things are likely what's causing the fight or flight. Once you identify those, you can then say, how do I remove this from my life, right? And that's the superpower you get from the self-awareness. So that's number one.
Well, and I think you brought up irritability, and I don't think people always know this, but irritability is a symptom, right, of depression and anxiety. And so if you're snapping at your kids more, you're coming home and fighting with your spouse, and you're like, God, that's not who I want to be. I'm just so irritable. That's a sign that something's wrong.
It is, and we have to stop normalizing that. Like, we have to stop normalizing that because this happened at work today, now I'm reacting at home this way, right? Like, no, that shouldn't be normalized. That should be a big red flag to say, this isn't who I am. What caused me to react this way? And so that's the beauty about looking at our stress triggers really closely, is because we do have so much power to remove them. The other thing I'll add with burnout in particular is we do have the victim mindset on a little bit higher than normal with burnout. We will say stuff like, well, my boss made me take this meeting, or I had to do this, or they made me feel this way. But the truth of the matter is that one of our greatest powers is the power to choose. And we get to choose how we react to things, and we get to choose what we do and we don't take, what we say no to, what we say yes to. And so while that can be really hard to process, by looking at stress triggers, you realize that you actually have a lot more control than you give yourself credit for.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate because I can hear people saying, not really. I can't always choose. Fine, you were the boss. You owned your company. But what if my boss is saying, I need this done by Monday, which means I'm going to have to work all weekend, and I really want to sleep in or go to my kids' games? Like, how do you put boundaries up when you really believe you don't have a choice?
Yeah, great question. That is always the question. So when I think of boundaries, I think of like looking at those stress triggers again, right? And saying to yourself, what might be the easier ones to implement? So maybe it's like one easy one is you realize that because you don't have you have your calendar open to everyone, people just book meetings whenever they want. And so now you're finding one at Friday at 6 p.m. and now it's already there. So you're like obligated to go. One boundary you can do is actually block certain pieces of time away, right? It's a simple thing. The thing that comes with boundaries is we have to communicate. So we have to have the courage to then reach out to our boss and say, I have certain times blocked on my calendar now. Those are my head down times. Those are the time for me to work on these deliverables due on Monday so that I don't have to work all weekend and I can go to my child's games. So it's about looking at how we are working. We can't have a free-for-all. So I love this example because when we start to take ownership of our time, then we can also get control of our energy. And so I think that's a really good example to come back with the one that you proposed to me, is like, it would be looking at like, how can I better manage my time so I have time built into my week for heads down time. And somebody coming from somebody who had 8 hours of meetings back to back, if I can do it, anybody can.
Yeah, That sounds like a nightmare. Okay, but let's talk about this. It's baby steps, right? You're not going to solve this tomorrow. If you're feeling overwhelmed by trying to fix your overwhelm, solving burnout, you say, begins with you. And the first goal, let's start with one goal, just self-awareness. How do we practically do that? Do we start writing down when we start noticing, just a little trigger journal, or what do we do?
Yes, well, my book has a QR code in it, and it's got a ton of resources. But if you don't have my book, get a piece. It can be a piece of paper. It can be a Word document. But all I want you to do is take 3 to 5 days where you, at the end of each day, you write down what made you feel stressed today. Just write them down. What you're going to likely see at the end of the week, that there are going to be some trends. There are going to be some things that happen multiple times in the week, and there's going to be some one-offs. You like to look at the trends first and say to yourself, how do I get these under control the most, because they're happening most often. I am a huge fan of 1% improvements. I feel like there's a ton of books out there these days. It's like 5 quick tips to, whatever result. And I don't really think that's how it works in real life. I think we have to make tiny steps of improvement. So if this is your one step where you are literally looking at the stress triggers, that's the step. That's all I want you to focus on for the week. And then from there, the next week, you're going to look at those stress triggers and say, how do I take control back from one of these stress triggers this week? That's it.
One stress trigger per week. Okay. And then there's a connection between burnout and losing your self-confidence?
Definitely. So we find that folks that are even in like stage 2, stage 3, like headed down, they are literally starting to be stripped of confidence. And we see these folks there's something called, I call it burnout brain, but it's decision fatigue. They're not feeling confident to make decisions any longer. They're just feeling like they are at the mercy of like whatever somebody asks of them. They're always saying yes. And so we sort of transform into a people pleaser mentality the farther we get. I think this is happening a lot because when we are not in control of our own value and our own self-worth, we are in the passenger seat of our own car. There's other things driving the car, right? And so you become in this place where you're like sitting in this stuck place, wondering why you're second guessing every decision you're making. And so your self-confidence is stripped down. So I will say the beautiful thing about that exercise we just talked about stress triggers and making your first boundary, it is instant gratification. When you put that first boundary in place, you are really going to feel like you've gotten like an ounce of confidence shot right back into your body. You're like, okay, I can do this. I'm a powerful force. And so the more we start to take control of our time and energy, which are our 2 most precious, resources, we're going to get our self-confidence back.
Yeah. And so as you do that, let's talk about this. For women especially, how do you say no without feeling guilty? And that's something I know we talk about a lot. One of the boundaries is no. And there's different ways of doing that, but we have to get comfortable. I've learned from one of my mentors, you can say, oh, I would love to, but I'm committed. But as a woman, we go, I'm committed, I've got this, that, and the other, and the person, you think that they're going to think that's worth it. But we don't really need to do that, right? We can say, I'm committed, and that commitment may be that white space on your calendar.
Yeah. My favorite approach to this is, oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking me or inviting me. I'm busy. I look forward to the next time I might be able to join you.
So having those scripts help, right? Just knowing that, yeah.
Yeah, we don't owe anyone an explanation either, right? I think that's the interesting thing too, is that we feel like we have to owe them this whole story of why we're committed. No, we're really grateful you thought of us, right? But we can't. That's it.
Well, Amy, I want to remind people you are the author of The Path to Break Free from Burnout. You went through your own cycle, as we say often. You teach what you have to learn. You went through it. You got that big successful business and then said, wait a minute, I'm dying over here. So you've written a book with a lot of research that people can find practical tips. I love, like, what can we do today? So far, we're making a list. We're keeping a journal of our biggest stress triggers. And then we're learning how to, just one boundary. Can we start saying no more. So, but also you say getting unstuck when you are drowning in a burnout cycle. How do we do that? Because sometimes people are just like, I can't even think about how to organize something because I got nothing left.
Yeah, the part about unstuck is that you have to give yourself some white space to become unstuck. And so part of that is looking for those, like I call them protected times that you can, even if it's an hour per week, what is that 1 hour that you're going to come up and actually start to solution against your current situation? One thing I'd like to weave in is that we start to see self-care pillars needing to be paid attention to very much when we're in burnout. They actually act as the coping mechanisms to be able to handle stress. And so I'm not talking about the bubble bath. I'm talking about sleep, nutrition, movement, relationships, spirituality, all of the main core pillars that we exist as humans and we thrive.
Yeah.
So when I often get a client, or even if I take myself, I was sleeping 4 hours a day. How was I supposed to handle stress? If you just take that alone, 4 hours, I was already emotional when I woke up. So everything was so much worse for me that day. And so part of getting unstuck is looking at where your self pillars might be a little bit off balance and going and starting to attack the one that is the most out of balance. For me, it was sleep. So I started to do like tiny little things like implementing a sleep routine, putting the lock on all my apps at 8 p.m. So like I could not use my phone and nobody could get through to me. Little tiny things like that slowly got my sleep under control. And then I moved to my next self-care pillar. So that's like resilience gear we're putting on every time we start to get these self-care pillars under control. And then it's also helping us get unstuck because we're feeling so good about ourselves to make movement, forward momentum.
Yes, yes. And sleep, we've done a lot of CURES on that. People can look back, but one of our regular psychologists who's a guest to say, let's do it for the low-hanging fruit, right? Sleep is the drug of choice for every doctor. I've probably interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, and they'll always say sleep is the drug of choice. Like our body can do healing, our stress hormones come down. You know, when we're dealing with burnout, you might be dealing with adrenal fatigue. There's some great solutions for that, but it starts with sleep. So I guess we can't emphasize how important that is, that even if you start with, all right, I'm going to start going to bed a half hour earlier every night until you get to and people say, oh, I can't do that. You know, I've got too much to do. But back to Arianna Huffington's book Thrive, with her senior management team at Huffington Post, she said she did sleep challenges because she said she wanted the best ideas. And ideas are like fish. You have to go deep to get good ones. So you're not actually being so great if you're not sleeping.
You are not effective. That's the thing. Burnout is the killer of all productivity and effectiveness.
So starting with the sleep, that seems like somewhat doable, right? And I love that. I know for me, sleep is really important. If I had 4 hours of sleep, that certainly happened to me when I've had to do different shifts. I'm not well afterward. So I think when people say they can't deal with it, like, let's start there. But you also have in your book, how to stay burnout free. So right now we're starting with just becoming aware of your triggers, working on the biggest ones, and then developing stress resiliency strategies. What are some of the best ones that people could take away, maybe starting right now?
So again, I'll go back to really leaning into all the self-care pillars. So I've named them off, but also they're in my book as well. You need to make sure that those are somewhat in balance. Like you are moving your body, you're getting enough, like you're not having long periods of the day where you're not eating, because again, blood sugar drops, right? We can't cope with stress when that happens. And so the self-care pillars are super important. I would say the next one is to start really paying attention to your energy. And this is where I like to have folks really staying in tune with their energy. Like once they start to say, okay, I've come out of burnout, now let's start auditing your energy after that to say, like, do we have any red flags that we're starting to see come present? Who are we spending our time with? That might be an energy vampire. That might be sucking our energy away, right? Because when we're in burnout, we don't really pay attention to how people affect us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we come out of burnout and we're on the healing journey, that's when we have to take a close look to say, who is actually stealing my energy from me and not giving it back. And so once we start to notice those folks, we have to, again, extend our boundaries to be able to say, okay, well, this might be my mom. I have to still have a relationship with my mom, but maybe when she talks about this one conversation that always causes me extra stress, or I start to feel this negative energy, I'll redirect the conversation to this, right? Like that's the kind of stuff we need to start thinking about. And then one other thing I have folks do is actually make like a 30, 60, 90-day plan. Once they start to come out of burnout, once they've done the work, and once they've sort of assessed, like, do they want to stay in this career? Do they want to stay with this company? Whatever the end goal looks like, for them to start mapping like how to get there and what are those little milestones. I think that idea that the light is at the end of the tunnel continues to help us not only grow, leverage our growth mindset muscle, but we are also stepping into more of the path that we're in charge of as we move towards that like goal. So it's reframing the way that maybe we had seen success before, and it's following this new path that we are aware of the stress, and we're keeping an eye on those stress triggers popping back in. But it's really that path forward that we're trying to achieve now with a really healthy approach.
Yeah, so again, so much of this is when people are burned out, they're thinking, I don't have time to do one more thing, so they stay stuck. But this is why in your book, The Path to Break Free from Burnout, you've sort of, you have given people a map so they can follow it and do one section at a time. We only have 2 minutes left, but let's just talk about nutrition. I encourage people to go back to many of my CURES podcasts with Dr. Stogg and Dr. Artemis Morris. Basic stuff. If you are dealing with lots of stress, some of the things like reducing inflammation, just making sure you're trying to eat more whole foods, maybe taking an omega-3. There's some basic things we could start doing to kind of turn on our body's own healing modalities.
Yeah, the anti-inflammatory foods is huge. And I always say 80, 20, 80% of the time. And I have a whole list in my book that I offer. I would say removing some of those unhealthy coping mechanisms, like lots of sugar, maybe the alcohol, like reducing that, because it's harder to get out of burnout when you're using those types of unhealthy and they're not helping your body inside. The other thing I would say is like making sure that you're eating more frequently, maybe smaller meals, but more frequently, just to keep the blood sugar stable, because when we're trying to make clear decisions, we do not need our blood sugar like bottoming out.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are trying to do the fasting thing, but at least for me, I've learned I need those small meals with the protein, or I burn out. So we have to leave it here, Amy, but I want to let everyone know the book, The Path to Break Free from Burnout, is available everywhere, right?
Yes, yes, everywhere.
All right, Amy, thank you for being with us, and for everyone, definitely share this with someone you love who maybe needs to hear it. You can follow me on social media at Kara Sundlin. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.